Anatomy of a breach. The year is 2024. The setting, the London Clinic, a fortress of discretion for the world's elite. Inside, a princess recovers from surgery, her body a state secret. The diagnosis is a ghost in the machine, a file protected by digital locks and oaths of silence. But silence in the age of information is a fragile commodity. It smells of old paper and new money. It can be bought, or it can be stolen. The public narrative was one of quiet recovery, a dignified retreat from the relentless gaze. The reality was a cold dread, the kind that seeps through sterile corridors. A fatal mistake was made not by a surgeon's hand, but by a keyboard's click. At least one staff member, sworn to protect, decided to look, to trespass into the most private territory of all, a person's medical truth. The breach was not just data, it was a violation of the soul, a digital grave robbing. The Information Commissioner's Office launched its probe, a perfunctory audit of a trust already shattered. The hospital CEO spoke of disciplinary steps, but the damage was done. The princess, a symbol of grace, was reduced to a case file, her mangled fate laid bare on a flickering screen. This was the true price of the crown. Not the weight of the jewels, but the unbearable lightness of privacy. Pause. A life lived in a gilded cage where even the walls of a hospital room have eyes. The inventory of lost selves begins long before the palace. It begins with a nickname, Squeak, a girl who captained her school hockey team and set a high jump record that still stands. A young woman who worked as a deckhand, feeling the grit of the Southampton port. She served tables, admitting she was terrible at it. This was the life before the title, a collection of ordinary moments that would soon become artifacts. Each step toward the throne was another nail in the coffin of anonymity. The University of St. Andrews was the gilded cage in miniature, where she studied art history and met a prince. The romance was not just a love story, it was a contract. Her past, her family's working-class roots in coal mines, her parents' journey to multi-millionaire status, all became chapters in a public ledger. The press began its relentless audit. Every photograph, every past job, every youthful indiscretion was excavated and put on display. The engagement ring was not just a jewel, it was a manacle. Marrying into the firm meant surrendering the right to be unseen. The transition was absolute, from Squeak to Her Royal Highness, from a person to a symbol. The public hunger for her story was a promise of the future violation, a promise that one day, even the secrets of her own body would not belong to her. Pause. This was not a fall from grace, but an ascension into a beautiful, inescapable prison. An inventory of origins. The official record papers over the cracks with talk of distant aristocracy, a convenient footnote. But the truth lies deeper, in the bedrock of the nation. Her mother's lineage is not written in peerage books, it is etched in coal. Generations of men whose lungs filled with dust so that the fires of empire could burn. This is the genetic inheritance that truly matters. It is a legacy of grit, of survival, of a working-class pragmatism that the Windsor dynasty has not possessed for centuries. They inherit castles. Her people inherited debt and a cough. Then came the pivot, the calculated alchemy of her parents, turning air and ambition into a multi-million-pound enterprise. Party pieces. A name so deceptively cheerful. It was not a business. It was an escape vehicle, a meticulously planned ascent from the world of flight attendants and dispatchers into the orbit of the landed gentry. This new money, however, carries a distinct odor. It smells of hustle, not history. It lacks the comforting decay of old wealth. For the firm, this background is both a valuable asset and a permanent stain. She represents a bridge to the common man, a transfusion of fresh, resilient blood. But she is also a constant reminder that the fortress is not impenetrable, that one can, with enough capital and a photogenic daughter, simply buy a key to the gate. Pause. Her existence is the ultimate fatal mistake of the old guard. A quiet admission that blood purity is no longer a viable currency. A posthumous audit of the woman who was. Before the palace, before the protocol, there was a ghost, a girl nicknamed Squeak, a person with a life now relegated to the status of trivia. The archive contains fragments. A deckhand at Southampton, hands raw from the ropes. A waitress, clumsy and inefficient, a role she admits she was terrible at. These are not charming anecdotes. They are the last artifacts of a life lived outside the machine. Each memory is a liability, a loose thread in the tapestry of a future queen. Her gap year was not a journey of self-discovery. It was the final, frantic gasp of anonymity before the gilded cage snapped shut. Florence, Chile, places where she was just a face in the crowd, a temporary silhouette. Her athletic records, the high jump that still stands, were not just youthful achievements. They were rehearsals, a training regimen for clearing the impossibly high walls of public expectation and internal royal politics. Even her education was a prophecy, a degree in the history of art. She studied the preservation of relics, the meaning of legacy, the construction of images. Pause. An unwitting preparation for becoming one herself. The person known as Catherine Middleton did not marry into the royal family. She was dismantled, her parts repurposed for a new construction. The original is gone. What remains is a state asset, a perfect symbol whose past has been curated into a digital casket. Her past is an archive of forgotten strengths, now repurposed for the crown. Consider the athlete. The high jump record at her school, a testament to youthful power, now looks like a training exercise. A preparation for leaping over protocol, for clearing the endless hurdles of public expectation. Her prowess in hockey was not about scoring goals. It was about learning to be part of a machine, to anticipate the opponent, to wear the uniform without complaint. These were not hobbies. This was the anatomy of survival. Pause. Her body was being conditioned for the long game. Then came the art. A master's degree in art history from St. Andrews. It sounds refined, a suitable passion for a future queen. But look closer. It was an education in observing, in understanding provenance and value. She learned to appraise objects of immense worth, to understand their history and their place in a collection. A perfect skill for a woman who would become, herself, a priceless acquisition for the House of Windsor. Her photography is the most telling exhibit, a desperate attempt to control the frame, to capture a private moment before it is stolen, processed, and sold back to her as a tabloid cover. Each family portrait she releases is not an act of sharing. It is an act of defiance, a futile gesture to own her own legacy. The final performance, a piano solo for Eurovision, a brief haunting melody broadcast to millions. A talent, once private, now deployed as a tool of soft power. A beautiful hollow note from inside the gilded cage. The body is the final frontier of privacy. For Catherine, that border was breached in March 2024. The London clinic, A name that once promised discretion became the scene of the crime. A fortress of medical secrecy with a traitor inside. The attempted access of her records was not a simple curiosity. It was a violation, a digital grave robbing while the subject was still alive. This was the fatal mistake that confirmed her true status. A national asset whose physical condition is a matter of state security. Her illness was no longer a private battle. It became a narrative crisis, a black hole of speculation that threatened to consume the carefully curated image of the monarchy. The silence that followed was not a period of recovery. It was the shadow of the bunker, a strategic retreat while the world's media laid siege. Her eventual video announcement was a forced confession, a hostage video delivered to a global audience. She had to perform her vulnerability to reclaim a sliver of control. The diagnosis was a verdict, delivered not by a doctor, but by the relentless machinery of fame. Now in remission, she returns to her duties. But it is not a return to normalcy. It is an acceptance of the sentence. The prediction for 2026 as a milestone year is not a promise of triumph. It is the schedule for her intensified service. Her health, her body, her future, they are all now entries in a public ledger. A bitter testament to a life lived entirely on the record, where even the sanctity of one's own flesh is subject to a posthumous audit. Pause. There is no escape. The year 2024 was not a medical event. It was a public vivisection, a cold and methodical inventory of a woman's deepest vulnerability. The diagnosis, a word meant for the sterile quiet of a consultation room, it became a headline screamed across the digital ether. The subsequent breach of her medical records at the London clinic was not a simple lapse in security. It was the anatomy of violation, a post-mortem audit performed on a living soul. Those sworn to protect her body instead offered up her secrets for digital consumption, a final, bitter betrayal. This was the true diagnosis, a terminal case of public ownership. The privacy she once knew was pronounced dead on arrival. The official investigation that followed was a mere formality, the quiet closing of a stable door after the thoroughbred of her private life had been stolen, dissected, and sold for parts. A fatal error that left an indelible stain on the institution and the woman at its center. By 2026, the scars had formed, not just the physical ones, hidden beneath layers of bespoke couture, but the psychological ones, which now served as the very architecture of her public persona. The recovery was declared complete, but the person who emerged was an entirely new entity, a kintsugi figure repaired with the gold of bitter experience. The athletic girl nicknamed Squeak, the art history student who fell in love, the waitress who was, by her own admission, terrible at the job. These are now just entries in a digital tomb, ghosts in the machine of her past. What remains is a monarch in waiting, forged in the twin fires of illness and betrayal. Her resilience is no longer the easy grace of youth, but the hard, unyielding strength of her coal mining ancestors, a genetic memory of enduring immense pressure in the suffocating dark. It is the grit, not the gold, that guarantees survival now. Her return to full-time duties is not a restoration. It is an ascension into a different state of being. Each public appearance is a calculated move on a grand chessboard where she is both player and prize. The smile is a masterpiece of engineering, a flawless facade stretched over the memory of profound pain. Her gaze no longer seeks connection, It performs a silent audit of the room, assessing threats, measuring loyalty. This is the bitter inheritance of her ordeal, a profound cellular understanding that the gilded cage has no emergency exit. The splendor is armor. The loneliness is a constant companion. Astrologers called 2026 a milestone year of high achievement. They mistook the nature of the achievement. It was not about growing in confidence, but about perfecting the containment of its absence. It was about mastering the art of being a symbol, a vessel for the projections of millions, while the individual inside learned to subsist on air. The future of the monarchy now rests on this scar tissue. Prince William stands beside her, but she is the one who has passed through the fire alone. She carries the knowledge of the system's ultimate fragility and its profound, impersonal cruelty. She knows that the adoration of the public is a volatile currency, and that trust is a resource more precious and more easily spent than the crown's billions. The verdict of the flesh was remission, a temporary reprieve. The verdict of her fate is something else entirely. It is a life sentence of duty, to be served in a palace of ghosts, where the only true privacy left is the silence inside her own skull. The princess is an archived memory. The future queen, Pause, has taken her place.